Well, happy Friday, y'all. Jason here, and welcome to another edition of What If I Told You? And on Monday of this week, we covered Bouvet Island, the most remote island in the world. Now, one of the islands that is within closest reach to Bouvet also happens to be the most remote inhabited island in the world. Bouvet, of course, has no inhabitants and is Norwegian. What if I told you that the most remote inhabited island in the world is also in the South Atlantic Ocean and is a British overseas territory? This is the story of Tristan de Cunha. Tristan de Cunha is part of the overseas territory of Ascension, St. Helena, and Tristan de Cunha, a British overseas dependency. Now, Tristan de Cunha was first discovered in 1506 by a Portuguese explorer named Tristan de Cunha, who proceeded to name the island after himself, of course. And Tristan de Cunha then, later on, the name became anglicized to be Tristan de Cunha, its present name. Now, when I say that this is the most remote inhabited island in the world, don't go expecting a mega metropolis here. The population as of 2021 is 252. 252 individuals, hardy overseas citizens. I shouldn't say squeak by a living, but they make, they have basically a subsistence lifestyle on Tristan, and this island has got quite the history to it as well. Now, the Dutch and the French kind of poked around the area in the 1600s and the 1700s when a British explorer in 1777 discovered the island, planted the flag, and that's how it became a British overseas territory. Around the same time, the American Revolutionary War came along and took the 13 colonies on the North American continent away from Great Britain. And at this time, Great Britain used the 13 colonies as a penal colony, as you may learn in your history. And King George was like, we don't have any place to send our prisoners. We have a backlog of prisoners in the United States. This is where Tristan de Cunha enters the picture. In 1778, the British Crown started sending its overflow prisoners to Tristan. So Tristan got its start as a penal colony, an island prison, which would, of course, serve it very well, because escaping this place as a prison is next to impossible, which would also be the future role of a different island in the overseas territory, St. Helena. More on that one later. But Tristan has a population of a little over 250 individuals, and they're all British citizens because it's British overseas territory. However, there's only been one incident in the island's history where people have traveled from Tristan to Great Britain, and that was when the island's volcano, St. Mary's Peak, erupted in 1961. This forced the evacuation of the entire island, and they moved to the British mainland. And eventually, after several years, nearly all of them returned. I would say that this is probably the world's most remote gated community. The island has no airstrip. The island has no port. Has no deep water port. And the only way to get to Tristan is fly to Cape Town, South Africa, and there is a boat. It's not even a passenger ship. It's a cargo ship that makes the round trip of about 2,200 miles 9 times a year roughly, or about once every month and a half. Trips to Tristan have to be planned months in advance. You also have to get the approval of the island council to even be allowed to visit. But when you do visit, you're going to see a place like no other. Those cargo ships do bring in food from the outside world. However, the island does produce some interesting food products. There is a area of the island called the Patches, which is where people grow potatoes. Tristan has a temperate marine climate, so the precipitation is relatively high and the fog is fairly consistent. And with their volcanic soil that has come from Queen Mary's Peak, it's a rich soil for potatoes. So the island grows a substantial amount of potatoes, more than enough to feed itself. Another food product of the island is actually off its shores. It's called the Tristan rock lobster, and it's one of the most prized shellfish in the world. So there's the potatoes are largely for feeding the island. The rock lobsters, on the other hand, are a very valued export. One of the most expensive shellfish in the world. And so there's an economic benefit to their immediate shoreline. Now, in case you're wondering, St. Mary's Peak, with the town at sea level, St. Mary's Peak, on the other hand, reaches about 6,650 feet above sea level. It is no short hike. And of course, this makes the entire island basically volcanic. The last eruption, of course, being in 1961, it has been dormant ever since. That said, it is monitored on the regular by scientists on the island. Now, in case you're wondering how these people communicate with the outside world, it's a little rough. Internet on the island is restricted to a small internet cafe, which is adjacent to the town pub. And as far as TV is concerned, they do have satellite TV and a satellite hookup. So these people can binge watch TV just like anybody else in the world. But internet access, of course, is limited to the internet cafe, which is part of the complex that involves the pub. Now, the Tristan government is, along with Ascension, St. Helena, and Tristan de Cunha, there is an appointed governor from the crown that is stationed there. Similar to what happens in some Canadian territories. And my previous example of Svalbard, the Norwegian sovereign area governed by an international treaty. As I mentioned before, there's the governor of Svalbard. This is a similar setup. So there is a governor or an appointed parliamentary officer who's stationed in Tristan de Cunha. The one village there, as if I didn't mention it already, is called Edinburgh of the Seven Seas, which of course is named after Edinburgh, Scotland. And given the green, lush pastures of the flatter parts of the island, it's an appropriate name, named for the lush green scenery of the town. And communication with the outside world, of course, postal mail is also available. And again, no landing strip, no port. That ship that comes over that I mentioned, it has to be anchored slightly offshore, a couple hundred feet offshore. There's no port deep enough to moor a boat. So there are small boats that have to be manned, and they bring any passengers ashore using those small, basically kayaks. They're brought ashore that way. And also, they also have smaller boats that can also transport the goods from the ship onto the island and then into the one general store that the island has, where everybody buys their goods that are not potato or lobster related. There's no cell phone service on the island. Phone service, however, is available through traditional phone lines or what we call landlines, which then connect to satellites. So home phones are available on the island, and the people who reside there do have those. Kind of in a way that most Americans cannot envision today. So the government does have to approve any tourists from going to the island, and it's actually mildly discouraged. You know, if you go to the Tristan de Cunha website, you will see that they will advertise that there are no hotels, there are no tourist facilities. Your accommodations on the island are generally provided by one of the civilians, who the government will provide a name for you. Once you provide them, specifics about who you are, what kind of a person you are, and most importantly, what you're traveling there for. So, housing is assigned, but as I mentioned, as you might figure, in a community this small, most are extremely gracious. And as expensive as it is to get there, it's not very expensive to stay there. Your lodging and accommodations are covered. Your room and board, if you will, are provided by your hosts. So, booking a place to stay by Expedia is not an option on Tristan, but it is basically provided for you. Transportation on the island, really interesting. There's actually one city bus or one town bus that does circle around the island, and it radiates out from Edinburgh of the Seven Seas and public transportation out to the patches where people can grow their vegetables. The other aspect about the patches that's very interesting is that it's a communal facility. Everybody has their own plots to grow things like tomatoes and, of course, potatoes and any other vegetables that they can grow, which is, of course, many because of the volcanic soil. It's very rich, and because the precipitation is very plentiful for this part of the world. And so people in town will take the public bus every day, go out to the patches, and to harvest or plant or till their crops. The other thing in this particular town is everybody helps each other in their particular plot. If somebody needs help with picking or harvesting, or fertilizing or tilling, everybody pitches in to help that person, and vice versa. They'll help each other in a way that you never could imagine anywhere else. And the reason why these people came back after they were in Great Britain, the mainland Great Britain, in the early to mid 1960s, after St. Mary's Peak erupted, is it was home. Everybody knew each other. Most everybody on Tristan is a descendant of the original British colonizers in the 1770s. From the same people who made it, who founded it, and of course created the initial penal colony, which then converted into Edinburgh of the Seven Seas later on, and where private homes were built. So this is one of the most unique places in the world. I will have an episode, a sneak preview, of course, on the other end of the overseas territory, which is St. Helena, itself remarkably remote, but very different and a very unique history. So stay tuned here, and I will have that for you a different day. But again, enjoy your weekend, guys. Enjoy your Friday night. Hope your week was good. And we will see you later on. Peace out, homies.